last month at Interior.
Secretary Haaland and White House Counsel on Environmental Quality Chair Brenda Mallory joined federal, state, local, and community leaders in Chicago this week to unveil temporary signage at one of the 3 sites of the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley National Monument. Robert's Temple Church of God in Christ in Chicago is the site of Emmett's widely attended visitation and funeral. His mother's decision to hold an open casket funeral for her 14-year-old son rocked the nation and helped spur the modern civil rights movement. The secretary then traveled to Riverside, California to highlight how investments from President Biden's Investing in America agenda are expanding access to clean, reliable drinking water for families, farmers, and tribes. The administration is making the largest investment in climate resilience in the nation's history and is providing much-needed resources to enhance Western communities' resilience to drought and climate change. Deputy Secretary Tommy Beaudreau was in Yellowstone National Park this week, where he met with members of the Youth Conservation Corps. Through the program, young people between the ages of 15 and 18 are provided with opportunities to learn, work, and recreate in the park in a way that is challenging, educational, fun, and expands their horizons while building unique skills. The team the Deputy Secretary met with has been working on installing bear boxes at one of the park's campgrounds, which will keep both bears and people safe. Interior and the Department of Housing and Urban Development this week announced new actions to make it easier for local communities to obtain federal land below market value to build affordable housing in southern Nevada. The collaboration between the departments occurs under the authority of the Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act of 1998, which allows the Bureau of Land Management to sell public lands within a specific boundary around Las Vegas, Nevada for development. Happy 46th birthday to the Office of Surface Mining, Reclamation, and Enforcement. OSMRE was created on August 3, 1977, with the signing of the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act to administer programs for controlling the impacts of surface coal mining operations. National Park Service Director Chuck Sams traveled to Grand Teton National Park to mark the 3rd anniversary of the signing of the Great American Outdoors Act, or GOA. Since 2021, GOA projects have supported some 17,000 jobs and generated about $1.8 billion for local economies annually. In celebration of the anniversary, today is a fee-free day at all lands managed by Interior. This week, we also celebrated World Ranger Day, an international observance that honors those who protect and preserve special places around the world for future generations. From creating trails, enforcing laws, and maintaining sites to restoring habitat, managing wildlife, and educating visitors, rangers may not wear capes, but they do wear a lot of hats. And our social media picture of the week, the ever-shifting dunes at New Mexico's White Sands National Park. The brilliant white gypsum sands make a surreal and breathtaking setting, especially during sunrises and sunsets, when the light reflects off the dunes, painting the landscape in warm hues. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. That's This Week at Interior.
Last month at Interior.
President Biden this week established the Bajnoavjo-Ita-Cookbeni ancestral footprints of the Grand Canyon National Monument. The area is considered sacred by many tribal nations in the Southwest, renowned for its natural, cultural, economic, scientific, and historic resources and its broad recreation opportunities.
I made a commitment as president to prioritize respect for the tribal sovereignty and self-determination, to honor the solemn promises the United States made to tribal nations to fulfill federal trust and treaty obligations. I pledge to keep using all the available authority to protect sacred tribal lands.
Secretary Haaland and Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs Brian Newland made their 8th and 9th stops on the road to healing this week in California. The year-long tour across the country addresses the tragic history of federal Indian boarding schools and provides survivors and their descendants an opportunity to share their experiences. Secretary Haaland traveled to Yosemite National Park this week as part of a month-long tour to celebrate the historic investments from the Great American Outdoors Act. The bipartisan law is improving visitor experiences, bolstering climate resilience, and investing in the economy by creating good-paying jobs in our national parks, wildlife refuges, recreation areas, and Bureau of Indian Education-funded schools. Interior announced over $44 million from the president's Investing in America agenda this week to meet critical ecosystem resilience, restoration, and environmental planning needs for the National Park Service in fiscal year 2023. Second Gentleman Douglas Emhoff and Assistant Secretary for Fish and Wildlife and Parks Shannon Estenos traveled to Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming to highlight those investments, which will support ongoing efforts to restore habitats, address climate change impacts, and bolster park resources for years to come. Deputy Secretary Tommy Beaudreau and Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner Camille Kalimlin-Tootin met this week with states and tribes to discuss water infrastructure and drought resilience related to the Colorado River. This first ever federal tribal-state partnership will promote information sharing and discussion among the sovereign governments in the basin and part of the department's ongoing commitment to engage with indigenous communities as the next set of guidelines surrounding the Colorado River are developed. This week, Interior also announced nearly $200 million to develop a more resilient water supply, support cooperative watershed management, and safeguard aquatic ecosystems. President Biden's Investing in America agenda represents the largest investment in climate resilience in the nation's history and is providing much-needed resources to enhance Western communities' resilience to drought and climate change, including protecting short- and long-term sustainability. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service joined federal, state, tribal, and private partners this week for an event at Williams Creek National Fish Hatchery in Arizona to celebrate recovery efforts for the Apache trout. The service is proposing the delisting of the fish as endangered under the Endangered Species Act. The event comes as Interior celebrates the 50th anniversary of the passage of the ESA this year. And our social media picture of the week, the red and white Nauset Lighthouse on the Cape Cod National Seashore in Massachusetts. Built in 1877, the Nauset Light is part of Cape Cod's rich nautical history and reminds us of the Cape's strong connection to the sea as it helps fishermen and recreational boaters navigate safely along the shore. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. That's This Week at Interior.
Last month at Interior.
Secretary Haaland this week led the United States presidential delegation to the inauguration of Santiago Peña as president of Paraguay. The delegation met with key counterparts and partners, participated in the inaugural ceremony and events, and met with President Peña to reinforce the United States' commitment to and strong relationship with Paraguay. The Secretary also met with women indigenous leaders to hear about the challenges and opportunities they face. This week marks the one-year anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. Among the historic investments being implemented at Interior, the Bureau of Land Management announced more than $18 million in funding to support 39 shovel-ready restoration and resilience projects in 10 states. BLM Director Tracy Stone Manning made the announcement during a visit to a project site in the Blackfoot-Clark Fork restoration landscape east of Missoula, Montana. Interior this week announced the launch of a new program and $72.5 million in funding through President Biden's Investing in America agenda to help tribal communities electrify homes. It's a critical step toward the goal of electrifying all homes in Indian country with renewable energy sources and advances the administration's goal of a carbon-free electricity sector by 2035. The funding comes from the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest climate investment in U.S. history. Interior this week announced $50 million over the next 5 years to improve key water infrastructure and enhance drought-related data collection across the upper Colorado River Basin. The Bureau of Reclamation is making an initial $8.7 million investment to support drought mitigation efforts in Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. Department leaders are on the road this month, highlighting how investments from the Great American Outdoors Act, or GOA, are addressing long-deferred maintenance projects. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Deputy Director Shiva Sundaresan visited Crab Orchard National Wildlife Refuge in Marion, Illinois, and Dale Bumper's White River National Wildlife Refuge in St. Charles, Arkansas, to highlight the success and importance of GOA funding across the National Wildlife Refuge system. The Office of Surface Mining Reclamation and Enforcement this week awarded $100,000 to restore the Pennsylvania watersheds at Dunkard Creek and Dunkard Township. OSMRE's Watershed Cooperative Agreement programs help local nonprofit groups restore watersheds harmed by abandoned mine lands and support citizen-based conservation in coal communities. And our social media picture of the week, the northernmost national park in the United States, Gates of the Arctic National Park and Preserve in Alaska. It's a vast landscape with neither trails nor roads, and visitors seeking its remote wilderness must rely on the knowledge, skills, and equipment that they bring with them. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. That's This Week at Interior.
Last month at Interior.
President Biden and First Lady Dr. Jill Biden visited Maui, Hawaii this week in the wake of devastating fires that have destroyed so many lives and livelihoods. Interior has mobilized its support as part of the all-of-government response to the disaster. Among those efforts, the department is coordinating closely with the Native Hawaiian community. The National Park Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service created a joint firefighter team to support on-the-ground efforts. And the department's Office of Environmental Policy and Compliance is working with state and non-governmental organizations to help identify natural and historical artifacts that suffered damage, as well as address concerns over traditional cultural sites. Interior this week announced the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management's approval of the Revolution Wind Project. Located about 15 nautical miles southeast of Point Judith, Rhode Island, the project will have an estimated capacity of 704 megawatts of clean energy, capable of powering nearly 250,000 homes. The approval, the fourth of the Biden-Harris administration, marks another step in fulfilling the president's goal to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind energy capacity by 2030. Deputy Secretary Tommy Beaudreau and White House Infrastructure Implementation Coordinator Mitch Landrieu were in Alaska this week. They highlighted how historic resources from President Biden's Investing in America agenda are supporting tribal communities impacted by climate change and advancing co-stewardship and salmon conservation across the Yukon, Kuskokwim, and Norton Sound region. Marking the third anniversary of the Great American Outdoors Act, or GOA, this month, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy, Management, and Budget Joan Mooney paid a visit to the Belmont Paul Women's Equality National Monument in the nation's capital. The National Monument is reopening after a 2-year closure thanks to GOA funding for major renovations. That comes just in time for the celebration of Women's Equality Day on August 26th. Bureau of Reclamation Commissioner Camille Kalimlund-Tutin traveled to Stockholm, Sweden this week to participate in World Water Week, an international gathering of government officials, scientists, and water policy experts focused on addressing drought and water scarcity around the world. Her visit highlighted the department's work to address the drought crisis afflicting the western United States, which is being worsened by the climate crisis. Deputy Assistant Secretary for Water and Science Annalise Bloom also delivered remarks ahead of a U.S. Geological Survey panel discussing cutting-edge science and technical tools being used to advance our understanding of global water challenges and the climate crisis. Happy 107th birthday to the National Park Service. Interior this week announced that visitor spending in communities near national parks in 2022 resulted in a record high $50.3 billion benefit to the nation's economy, while also supporting nearly 380,000 jobs. Nearly 312 million people visited national parks last year. Interior this week announced new measures to enhance worker safety and ensure offshore oil and gas operations on the outer continental shelf are conducted with the utmost safety and oversight standards. The final well control rule from the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement builds upon the historic regulatory reforms implemented in the aftermath of the 2010 Deepwater Horizon disaster. Interior's Office of Environmental Policy and Compliance this week unveiled the winners of this year's Environmental Achievement Awards. The awards recognize employees and partners who have made exceptional contributions through projects in 8 categories aimed at fostering the protection and preservation of cultural and environmental resources. And our social media picture of the week, this fuzzy little American marten at Yellowstone National Park. But don't let the sweet face fool you. The marten can be aggressive and territorial, with short legs and curved claws that help them climb trees and chase their prey, like squirrels, chipmunks, and rabbits. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. That's This Week at Interior.